Welcome, everybody, to the Deconstructor of Fun podcast. Today, I have Christian Ress, CEO and co-founder of PlaytestCloud, a service that I've been using. How long would it be? I would say 8 years, probably 8 years altogether. How long has PlaytestCloud been in business?
About 8 years.
Yeah. That's pretty much, because if I would have said 10 or 12, I would be talking about usertesting.com, which I used before PlaytestCloud, and the PlaytestCloud kind of came in as the de facto testing platform for games, because usertesting.com was kind of like a generic testing platform. So when this first came out, and shout out to Antti Hattara, who's the from Starberry Games, who's an advocate. Back then he was working at Wooga and very much an advocate for PlaytestCloud in the Finnish mafia. So he distributed this within the Finnish mafia of mobile gaming, and I think pretty much every company here uses it. So really great to have you on this podcast, because now I'm putting a face to a service I've used for such a long time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Hey, Mishka, it's good to be here. And, you mentioned Antti. I think, like, a lot of this wouldn't have happened without him. Like, he was one of our...
This is gonna just make him think too much about himself. like this would have happened definitely without Antti.
Let's say he certainly helped. It was good to have him by our side.
Yeah, Antti was actually my first boss. Like, he was my entry ticket to gaming, so he hired me. So I'm always grateful to Antti, but I just don't want his head to grow too big because of all his recent and future success.
We'll be careful.
Yeah, how's it going, Christian?
Yeah, doing well. We've had Berlin weather, and now it's switched. We're at sunshine, and it's wonderful actually, because we've had so many gray months here.
We have a blizzard.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Well, good that we're indoors, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it's Finland. We don't proud ourselves with the weather. It's a defensive weather. If you know what I mean.
Lets you focus on making great games.
Yeah, there's nothing to do outside. That's true. Just stay at home and play.
Yeah. Certainly.
Yeah. So, do you want to just kick it in, or do you want to let me know?
Sure. Where do you want to start?
Why should people use PlaytestCloud? Why should developers and publishers? What's the benefit of it? I know I've been. For me, it's just I don't know. It's like Google Sheets or PowerPoint. It's just part of the tool. Part of the tool sheet. I don't kind of even mention it because I feel like it's almost automated. But I remember when I moved to US and I was working at a corporation, aka Zynga, and I've noticed that large companies, because Finnish companies are pretty small in terms of size of population, it's also size of population, but in terms of how many people are working on a particular game or in a particular company, they're quite small. So we kind of did everything ourselves, and that's why services like PlaytestCloud were de facto and no-brainers. But then going into a corporation, they're like, "What do you mean? We don't do our own user tests. That's why we have the 20 people that are working in the user research department, and we will bring in people that we can watch behind the glass, and we can do the same thing behind the glass in Houston and in other middle America cities where we can understand a bit of better players." And I was like, why? That costs $75,000 where we can do a test that costs $60 and do 5 of them overnight without big issues. Anyways, but this is me just telling my perspective, but what's your perspective?
Yeah, I love it. I think the underlying thing about playtesting is that we're all in the business of making games that want to give players a certain experience. Either we want to have them enjoy something that's super fun, we want to make a game that's super challenging, but regardless of what direction the games go into, there's always a vision and a design for the experience players should have. But how do you find out if your game's actually living up to that? And how do you do that before the game is live? Because then it's too late. If you wanted to make this super scary horror game, but you're launching it and people are like, this is I'm not feeling it. You just wasted 2 years, worst case. And that's really where we fit in. So the way I see PlaytestCloud is that it gives game designers, producers, but also user researchers, tools to find out if the player experience is actually what they want it to be. And you mentioned like small companies, big companies. We actually see people on all ends of the spectrum using PlaytestCloud. Like we've got some shops, like one person working on their indie game using PlaytestCloud to make sure they're getting it right. But we're also supporting like some of the biggest game studios out there who have these departments with like your 20 user researchers or something. But they don't want to deal with having to schedule people coming to an office. And I mean, look at the last 2 years. That has been difficult anyways. But even before then, you want to have user testing, play testing, not be something you have to worry about, not be a barrier. It should be easy. If I need 20 people who love shooter games to try my multiplayer game out tomorrow night because that's when the new feature is done, I shouldn't need to schedule this thing for 4 weeks. I should be able to go, and you can go to PlaytestCloud and just say, hey, get this done. Here's the build. Here's what I want to find out. And then you get the videos back. So why should people use PlaytestCloud? I think if you're focused on your players, you want to give them a good experience, ignore PlaytestCloud. You got to playtest. You got to find out if what you're doing actually gets the job done. But tools like ours make it super easy. And we want to remove these barriers because everybody is, so much needs to get done. And like if playtesting is a chore, people don't want to do it. We want to make it easy. We want to make it fun to do, fun to see people play a game.
Yeah. So I was kind of summarizing how I feel about it. It's like easiness is definitely one of them. It has to be easy. Like you have to be able, like with let's say Sensor Tower, you can easily look at how much game is making, what are the downloads. You don't have to do too much work. But another three things that I like about about PlaytestCloud is, as you mentioned, the velocity. So basically how fast it is to get the test done. So you don't have to schedule it, because that was the thing that was happening with the on-site tests as well as with external audience tests. Of course, they tend to go much deeper, or we can go pretty deep with PlaytestCloud. We're going to talk about that as well. But you have to schedule a time. You have to do a lot of groundwork before you can get the tests done. With this one, it's rapid. It's like overnight, essentially. The third part, which is really important, is that you can do a lot of targeting. So you talked about shooter games. That's an example, but you can do anything basically. You just look at what kind of games is your target audience playing, and you can target based on that. You can target based on the games they're playing, the demographics, the countries, the platforms. So you can do all of that really quickly. So you're making sure that you're getting your game in hands of the players you're intending to acquire at some point, which is something that doesn't always happen when you're doing on-site tests. And also, like with PlaytestCloud, you also get some misses. You're like, this guy doesn't know how to play shooters. Like, what is he talking about? But at the same time, it's so fast to get 5-10 of them that you just kind of rapidly go through it, and versus like having that one person come into the office and like, okay, that was a waste of time. And the final one is, you said videos, and especially the format of the test is quite powerful. So instead of sitting behind the glass, which I've done too many times, at a weird hours also, this one comes in the video format because it's recorded as the player has been playing it at the most convenient place where they are. So you can see where the taps are happening. And most importantly, you can share very easily the results of the test. You can just share the video with a bookmark. So usually when you start playtesting, you're trying to find different kinks and quirks and issues with usability, and being able to share that video and that, especially like at minute 32 seconds, you can see the player trying to search through the menu and being unable to close the menu and getting quite frustrated. That is going directly to your, UI engineer or whoever is in charge of it. They change it a little bit, and lo and behold, that issue will never be arised. And if you would be quickly launching your game, you might experience a low D1, but you won't know what the issue is. But now you actually saw it, and it was really easy to test, and it's well worth your money. So easiness, velocity, targeting, and format would be the four things that I would raise it.
Yeah, I think what I would also add to this is that it's all about nobody's helped with running a single playtest. It's not about like doing this one-shot thing at the end of your development, like, hey, let's do a quick round on usability or something like that. Sure, you will find issues, you can fix them, and that can actually help you quite a bit. Got a fun story to tell there, maybe later, about a company that got started with us like this, because that's usually how it happens.
No, just tell it now. I'm interested.
Well, this was actually one of the first playtests we've ever done, and I can't mention the company here, but it was like a TV show IP. They've worked on this game for a long time, and they were just about to bring this into global launch. They had skipped some steps. They didn't want to like spoil too much about the game, and they felt pretty sure about it. So I still don't know how this happened, but we won them over. Like, it was just Marvin and me, my co-founder, sitting literally in a basement working on PlaytestCloud. But we got them to try PlaytestCloud, and they ran a test, and just FTUE 15, 30 minutes of gameplay. And in the first, you know how games work, right?
Yeah.
Guided tutorials and all of that. People were not able to make it past the first step in that guided tutorial. They had to do some interaction on the screen, like drag a thing on a character to make him do an action. And like 80% of the people failed at this. And not like, oh, they had a trouble doing it and it took them 30 seconds or so. No, like we had people stuck on this for 15 minutes. And like the average time it took people to get past this was like 5 minutes. And the people at the company were shocked. Like, all the testing they had done was internal, friends and family, and it makes sense because they've played this for so many times. Like, they knew exactly how to drag this thing over to like the exact spot it needed to hit on the screen, but real people out there couldn't have done this. And like, this was a high profile IP. It would have crashed and burned when they launched this. And sure, they could have fixed it, and like 3 years later, nobody would have thought about it anymore. But the sheer fact that they were oblivious to that being a problem because they hadn't tested with actual people was surprising for us, but it also confirmed the value in making playtesting so accessible. But for them, this was a huge win. Like, they did a couple of iterations on like this part of the tutorial, making it easier and easier. And I think they still like have this in the game these days. If it's even still in the App Store. Last time I checked, like, it was still there. And like, you just like drag this thing anywhere close to the character, and it's like, boom, next step in the tutorial. Like, they just wanted to remove any barrier to this, because people would have they would have closed that game. I mean, there's enough choice out there. You don't need to deal with that.
Exactly. And that's the thing, like analytics are really important, but especially when we're looking at the first steps in usability, analytics doesn't really help. Like, you just see that there's a problem.
Exactly.
And then you can go, chasing your tail of what the problem is, doing a bunch of different changes, and then this one you can kind of pinpoint the issue.
Yeah, what we like saying is playtesting helps you understand why people play how they play. And, you mentioned analytics here. I think especially later on in the development, when you've got this, they show you where a problem is, but you need other tools to understand what's happening. And playtesting is one that we've seen help a lot with that, because it's quick and you can really pinpoint the source of a problem too. It's like one thing that people don't like interact with this one thing or never choose that one character, but why do they not do this? And it might be something that happened like 5 days before in the gameplay where they didn't understand some crucial element. But I think back to like that story real quick. For the next game they made, like, you can imagine that playtesting became a much like more pronounced part of their development, and that's also what we see the studios that are like highly successful and using PlaytestCloud do. For them, especially during the times when they're working on the FTUE, when you're working on that like session to session gameplay of the first few sessions, they test extensively on PlaytestCloud. Like, every few weeks you get a test. We've got some clients who are like on test 200 or 300 even. I mean, they've pivoted a lot with their games, like, from the art team to the UI team to the game designers, everybody just keeps testing all the time because they don't want to make assumptions.
So what's the phase of development where you should be testing? Because we've been talking about, essentially games in production, kind of gaining, picking up speed to enter market, so testing for TUIs. But what are the different phases, and is this something that you do when you're developing game, or is this something that you do when the game is already developed? Because I've never actually run the longer PlaytestCloud tests that last for, okay, so let's take a step back. Can you walk us through multiple different tests that like, how does PlaytestCloud work? What kind of different tests? And then let's talk the use cases maybe better when you kind of describe all the products in the portfolio.
Yeah, let me give you the actual pitch here, just so we can lay it all out.
Okay,
and then
now
dive
is
in.
the actual pitch. Now it's coming.
Not just stories. So PlaytestCloud is a platform for doing what we call unmoderated testing. So it's all about putting your game into the hands of the players and letting them experience it just as the game is. So there's nobody sitting next to them telling them what to do. The way the platform works is that you can choose from all sorts of different tests that are mainly based on how long players should play. So we've got like very short first-time user experience tests, one session, 15 minutes. Then you can do what we call multi-session tests, where people play a couple of times, but they have to take a break in between. So something that's commonly used once you actually have a bit more to play, but also to simulate that experience that people have when they play a bit in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening when they watch Netflix, something like that. So very open-ended session, if you will, but you know what you're going to get. Like, I want 1 hour across 4 sessions or something like that. And then on the long end, we've got what we call longitudinal studies, where people play for a set number of days. Let's say you want to get people playing for like 10 days. We can do that. We'll give people like a day or two to take a break in between, so they can also, take care of like whatever they need in their life. On top of that, we've got another couple of like aspects. So you can do all of this with multiplayer games as well. If you need people to play at the same time and your game is still in development, you need to make sure all the testers are online at the same time. So there's actually somebody like in the arena or whatever you have that they can play against. So we can do this for like a short test. We can do like, we've done this recently, like a 10-day longitudinal study. People had to play 4 hours every day. It was nuts.
Holy shit.
And this was like 40 people, multiplayer, 4 hours every day. And
I hope it was a good game.
It turned out to be a really good one. I can't mention the name, but like
sounds like Axie Infinity. Like you have to grind it for money.
Yeah, well, there are only so many games to grind that long. But that's
literally
the
Playground.
High end. Yeah, but also like, this is like all like very far like into the development of the game. I mean, you need a lot of content to like test that long. We also have some specific tools to help you understand players earlier on in the development cycle. So we do concept testing, which is pretty much showing players a slideshow with videos. You can use it for ad testing. You can do narrative testing. We see a lot of like hidden object or story-based games refine the story this way. We also have surveys. So sometimes you need more than like 10 people to give you feedback because you're making decisions on things like naming, the art theme of your game, stuff like that. But you still want that targeting that you mentioned earlier that we can do, where you can find very specific players. So we can do surveys with them up to hundreds or even more participants. And that's pretty much the portfolio. So we've got like surveys, concept testing, single session, multi-session testing, and then longitudinal studies. And also in this sort of order, like we suggest using them in that sort of order. But before I get into that, let me talk a little bit about like the experience of actually using PlaytestCloud. So when you work on a game, you want to use PlaytestCloud, oftentimes you think like, okay, I'm going to need to put an SDK in for tracking or whatnot. That's not the case. So we develop the platform in a way where you can just drop your build in, whether it's on iOS or on Android, or if it's on the Play Store already, you can also do that. And then you get a recording of people playing this game, and they're going to think out loud. And if you haven't done playtesting before, thinking out loud means that the people will just walk you through what they're doing. They might be like, oh, I really don't know, like, how do I upgrade this weapon? Like, I need to look at this, at that. That's confusing. You'll get feedback like this. And together with that, you see the screen recording, you see where people touch the screen. And that gives you a really holistic view of what these players are actually doing and how they are thinking about your game as they play. To me, like the key aspect of this is it helps you develop like some gut feeling for how people really behave in your games. You get like all these like sensory inputs, and as you watch these videos and as you iterate on your game, you have a much better mental model of whatever your target audience really is, whether it's like the shooter players, some hyper casual like kids from like Germany or wherever you want to test from. You'll watch these videos and you develop that mental model. You can then analyze that, share it with your team, and learn how you can get it closer to whatever vision you have.
How does the where do you get your players, and how many do you have?
Yeah, we've got over 1 million now.
1 million players.
The last 2 years were a boon for growing like a database of people who want to play games remotely.
I do have to say, like, you're really killing it with play to earn. Like, this is it, right?
We just need to add the coins.
You should definitely just add a little NFT and call yourself a metaverse, and you're off to $1 billion valuation.
Yeah, we might have to think about that. So we've got this north of 1 million players, mainly from the US, UK, and Canada. We're in the process of also opening it up to more countries, and probably by the time this goes live, our announcement on like opening up testing in more countries than just these 3 will be live. In the beginning, we're launching that in Southeast Asia, Germany, some European countries, mainly based on where we have a lot of players. But we'll keep growing that. And you asked where these testers come from. So 8 years ago, when you just started working with us, we went to Reddit and just got people from there. But then over the years, our user acquisition looked pretty much like the user acquisition of any mobile game. We went to Facebook, did a lot of targeting, like looked for the sorts of players that we didn't have enough of yet, and just grew that. And at the stage we're at now with the size, a lot of the growth is organic. So people get a little money in return for playing, and of course the word on that spreads regardless of like what profile we're talking. And we do testing with kids as young as like ages 3 and 4 together with their parents, all the way up to, I think our oldest playtester is 87. So that's quite a spread of ages and experiences we've got there. And yeah.
No, that's awesome. So let's get back to the sort of like original questions of like when to use different tests, and more like how. If you can go through some of the examples of the companies that have been using everything from concept testing to the longitude surveys.
Yeah, totally. I think our motto is always test early, test often. And this is also something you hear a lot in user research and usability testing circles. And we say that because you want to do the testing at a time where it can have an impact. And like all testing we do and we talk about is done because you want to change something in your game potentially, or you want to find out that you don't need to change anything. So you want to find out like what isn't working as early in the process as possible, so you haven't invested like a year of time in creating art assets for a style that just doesn't resonate with your target audience. So how early you want to get started testing? As soon as you have something to show to players. I think it also helps starting so early because you can involve your team a lot more. One of the biggest barriers we actually see to starting to test early is game teams pushing back on like, no, this isn't ready yet. We can't possibly show like this prototype, this like pre-production build, or like even this story like outline to people yet. We need to refine it more. And that concern is of course understandable, because they want to refine it more. They don't want to like find out that they know what's wrong with it, they think. But oftentimes when you put it in front of players, you find out that your assumptions were wrong. So let's talk specifics here. The very early testing is usually focused on discovering issues, finding out if, this type of game you want to build is actually good for the target audience that you have in mind. I'm going to talk about a hidden object game here because hidden object games like make it really easy to talk about concept testing. And you know how games these days are, like Vuga's games, Prosperol, June's Journey, and so on. They're heavily story driven. They appeal to a certain crowd, and they live from this episodic nature where you can add more and more chapters to the story, and people really become invested in how these games work. When we work with studios that make games like this, it's super interesting to see all the like testing that happens before they like do the first thing in Unity or wherever. They have like storyboarded out the entire game. They have the narrative. They have like mood boards with like, here are like the characters. Here's like the shipwreck. Here's this. Here's that. And sometimes it goes as far as, they make little mock-up videos of this to show the story to players. And they ask them like, okay, like, who are the main characters in this? What's the, like, why does this character, like, aspire to, like, find their lost lover? Because they test understanding. It's all about, like, from showing this part of the story to our players, do they get why they should care? And do they care? And then you start refining it. And the cool thing here is you can iterate super quickly. Like, you put this into the hands of the producers, the art team, like the narrative director, and they can, like, people use a PowerPoint for this. They put together a PowerPoint, put some questions on there, and then put it in front of the players, run the test in the evening, in the morning. They work on the next iteration and refine what needs to be refined to really make the story stick. And we see this for other games too, like some casual, like match 3 games that were all about cooking. Should have done this a bit earlier, because when they did this like relatively late in development, they found out that the style of art they chose for their food wasn't appealing to their audience. And
so this is interesting because I've actually never done these type of tests with PlaytestCloud. We've done we've done those app store and like kind of like game description ones, so where you write about the game, and we tested different type of settings in written format. What I've done for the art style and the setting, I've done a lot of tests on Geek Lab where basically you're just testing the marketability of the theme and not per se how they feel. But that's actually a good idea to kind of do both. To kind of hear a little bit of a qualitative feedback of why certain things don't work, because we only see, the IPMs and the CPI of those early tests of what theme doesn't work, what works. We don't really know why this, cyberpunk thing didn't work. Was it because of cyberpunk, or was it because of the style of the cyberpunk that was done? And I think you could get more nuances by running the tests on both platforms.
Yeah, I think you need to do both. Like, playtesting cannot replace that, like, quantitative, like, can we, like, build a business out of, like, something like this? But it can give you a lot of insight into what resonates with players and why, which will help you, especially if you're exploring, like, a direction of game that your team doesn't have a lot of experience with yet. On the art side, like, I have one other like fun example here, and this was for resource management game. Think like Fallout Shelter, but in a different setting. And it had a very strong narrative component. And what that team identified as one of the risks was that players will not identify with the characters that they put in there, and they will not, see them as what they really are. And one example here was they had a guide in that game who would help sort of explain how the game works.
Yeah, like put an NPC.
Yeah. And this was the hotel manager. So wore a suit and big guy, and they wanted to have him look like he knows what he's doing. People were like, oh yeah, I don't trust that guy. Looks super shady. And now the main character that guides your players around and should help them learn the game is perceived as being this shady character, which wasn't intentional at all. And this was left field for them. They didn't really expect that, but they made some tweaks, fixed that, and the whole onboarding and all of that flowed much better because people didn't have that association seeing that character. But I would say let's move on a bit here. We talked enough about concept testing. The next stage really is you're beginning to build prototypes. You're working on the mechanics. You're trying to see what works, what doesn't, level design, depending on what you're working on, which is a fantastic time to playtest. So we're seeing a lot of games start at the stage where, you have programmer art, you have some really simplistic things that try and figure out okay, these sort of controls, do they work? It's focused on the usability potentially, but also level designs. Will people understand these boosters if we're talking match 3 games? Will people understand, the meta game that we're putting together here? Does it make people want to keep going? Whatever it is that is so risky that you prototype that first, why not put it in the hands of players as well? We often see reluctance with this, ooh, is it too early? People will not know how to use it.
Yeah.
And they won't. That's fine. They will complain that, oh yeah, it looks like shit. There's no art, no music. But it doesn't matter. That's not what you're testing here. You know that. What I want to know is, are people able to I don't know, navigate this map and move the camera with this control scheme I devised? Or does the weapon combining mechanic get understood? And then when you're testing this, you have to laser focus on those issues. You got to know, what do I want to find out? And I don't want to find out is the game in the current stage appealing to players? I want to find out, do they get this mechanic? Does this sort of design confuse everybody because it confused the entire team? Or do players actually enjoy it? So it's a good way to work around these assumptions. And, when you make a game, you have to make a lot of assumptions. This is a quick way to test them and get to something more data driven. The studios that work with us that are consistently delivering games that, are fun, commercially successful, they start this early. It's very rare that studios skip any sort of playtesting and go straight to launching a game with a super refined first-time user experience. And it's because it works. You need to see how people actually play, even if you've done 10 games already, especially then, because you're not the player. You need to base this on the actual gameplay people are showing you. What's your experience testing in this area? When you're creating new mechanics, I mean, I know what you guys are working on right now, and I'm sure there are some things where it's will people get this? How do you manage that?
Yeah, I mean, the earlier you get to testing, the better, to be honest. We, as any other company, actually, with any studio that I've worked at, it's been the same thing. It's it's too early. We know all these things. But no, you have to you have to see players suffering playing your game and not being excited about it, getting bad results. That's really important. It's it puts the whole different speed into your team when they understand that what they're doing is not actually that great. And then it also gives a lot of hope because you're able to tweak quickly and get to good results and be okay, we're actually making the game better. So my experience is the same. Nobody wants to test. when they test, they're surprised, and when they tweak and improve the game based on the tests improve and everybody's happy.
Yeah. And I think what helps is having, like, you need a champion in those teams who will advocate for putting this in front of players. And you need to be very clear with the expectations of some of these early tests, like stuff is not gonna work and you might have to give players a bit more guidance. That's all fine. Like, it's still so valuable if you know what you're looking for. And you can also empower the different, like, departments working on your game, like art, like game design, narrative, whatever you have for your game, to do this testing on their own. And it's gonna create this effect where, like, people see that, okay, they keep testing, like they keep talking about this stuff, and they say, like, oh, we made this decision because people didn't understand this, or like people really loved this. It's gonna make other people want to test as well. And
100%. What are the sort of experiences with these longitude tests? Like, I've heard of them. I think I know a couple of companies that were doing them. I believe Super Evil Megacorp was running those tests, but it's been a while since I've discussed with somebody who's been doing those tests. So can you talk a little bit more about how they are being set up and what are the results of those?
Yeah, totally. So these later, like, longer studies where you actually have people playing for multiple days or multiple sessions are usually used more for diagnosing certain issues or optimizing the experience. So I talked about, like, early stage testing being for discovering things and, like, making all these, like, decisions in the beginning, like setting the game on the right tracks, whereas longitudinal studies help you really solve retention issues, or like issues that result from people not understanding certain aspects and ignoring parts of the game as a result. Let me give you two examples here. One is a game that like used these studies extensively during the development, and it's an exercise game, like think like Zombies Run, but with a very different take on it. And I think every single playtest they have ever done with us, like even from the early stages, has always been a longitudinal study for like 5 or 7 days, because for them it was extremely important to design this like session to session gameplay. Like, it's an exercise game. If you can't get people to want to come back on like the next day and the day after to like go on a run or like work out, your game is set up for failure. So they could have had the best first-time user experience in that first session ever. It wouldn't have helped them if they hadn't have visibility on the other parts. So sometimes you have a game where it's so crucial that you're not just designing for those like first 30 minutes and day one, but where success is measured in like initial success, like day 7 retention. Otherwise, if people don't understand your game because it's super complex, they will never come back. Of course, to some extent you have that in many games, but there are some where it's super important. But more commonly, we see longitudinal studies being used because the game is in soft launch or it's launched already. Yeah. And, day 3, day 5, it's just not where it needs to be. And usually teams don't start playtesting when they first see an issue like this. You're doing A/B tests. You've got some assumptions for like what you can tweak to like get the numbers up. But if all of that fails, they usually want to understand why are people churning much more than like other titles we have on those days, and can we somehow salvage this? That's where playtesting comes in. Let's say you have issues with day 5, your game is typically played like half an hour a day in multiple sessions or something like this. You can set up a playtest that matches this like typical playtime, put 5, 10, 15 people in there, and we'll have them play. They can, but like they usually don't churn during the playtest. That's not the goal of it. But if you have 70% drop off by day 2 or day 3, we'll see that in the excitement players have to continue playing. And we asked people after every session, after every day, hey, would you continue playing if this wasn't a test, which can be quite useful to see, okay, an issue begins to happen on day 2, it might lead to something on day 5. And a game that we've done this for, again, can't really name the game here, but resource management, bit of city building, and they had like an aspect where you were sort of like breeding certain animals together to like have new stats, which was a crucial part of the game. But a lot of the players ignored that entirely, and they could not figure out why. They ran this longitudinal study. They saw similar behaviors in the study where people, they got going with the game. They felt like they understood it, but they never went to this one part of the game. But in some of the videos, they understood why. Players did not understand the benefits this breeding would give them for the like late game, like if we were talking like day 30, day 90, and so on, because they completely botched the introduction of that feature, but they weren't aware of that. And they fixed how this breeding mode was explained. They changed the whole like unfolding of that and how they weaved it into the story of the game. And it resulted in a lot better retention. People actually understood that game mode. They tested it, and when they relaunched like a version with all of these changes in place to like how the feature was explained, how sort of that like knowledge of like this mode was introduced to the players, it did much better. And for them, this would have been the difference between like killing the game and it being commercially successful. So, you know, this was a long way of saying, like, if you're seeing something in the numbers that you don't understand, it helps looking at what people are actually doing and thinking as they play this.
And that's an important part, because, you know, I've been in situations where maybe the day 1 has been good, but the day 2, day 3 are kind of falling off the cliff, and you're trying to figure out, should we change the futility, like what's going on, because we've been doing those early testing, and that's where this longitudinal test is very helpful, because, you know, sometimes the analytics just doesn't show, and you have a bunch of gut feelings, or you're doing a few updates, and it's already a few months later, and you haven't been able to improve. So now you need to get that qualitative information, and for that one, these tests are very powerful. And how do you? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. This reminded me of like a study we've done for a game quite recently, and I love that setup, because what they did is they paired. This wasn't their first time around. Like, they were a team that's very like experienced with playtesting and integrating it into their development process, but they combined their soft launch with also running a 2-week longitudinal study at the same time. The goal that they had in mind with this is they knew they're going to get a lot of data on, you know, what exactly is happening in the game during these 2 weeks, but they expected that they're going to have questions that the data cannot answer, and they didn't want to, you know, lose any more time on like, okay, let's test a few things, tweak it, launch again, like, see what the numbers say. So they ran a longitudinal study in parallel with their soft launch. I think we had like 20 people on PlaytestCloud side playing, and of course, you know, for the soft launch, they went pretty big to also get numbers on like all sorts of other things that you can't get from a playtest. And what they did 2 weeks in is then review the data, and they also looked at the playtest results, and it helped them a ton, because they could understand certain signals that they saw in there, like this thing not being used, or people like dying a lot here, whatnot, based on the playtest data, because they could dive in and see like, okay, this seems to be like, we misjudged the difficulty of this. People from that audience are not faring well with like this game type, but they prefer that one. And it gave the team a lot more visibility into how people were actually playing the game in the real life. And I thought that was a very smart way of combining your data gathering from like analytics, but also running a playtest, and then speeding up how quickly you can get this game like launch ready.
Perfect. That's a really powerful information there, and because I know a lot of studios are only using PlaytestCloud for the early phases, and not really, have not experienced, like myself. I, for example, haven't had the experience of using these longitudinal tests and kind of like relying that, well, we'll figure it out in soft launch. We'll just use analytics and our gut feeling, and we'll figure it out. But it is important. So regarding to that, like how do you make sure that the studio is doing analysis correctly when they're getting all this feedback? Because I bet a lot of the clients you have don't have their own market researcher, or sorry, not market, but user researchers.
Yeah.
And they're kind of watching these videos themselves. So how do you make sure that the analysis is correct?
Yeah, I ask this question to our team like frequently because we work with people for whom this is the first time playtesting, and like what can we do to help them? And one side of this is that PlaytestCloud, it's a tool, and you have to learn how to use this tool. And I think that's important to acknowledge. Like none of us are super experienced, like when we first start out, in setting up good playtests, but also in analyzing them. And I think especially if you're starting out, if like you're planning like your first playtest, if you think like, okay, I haven't done this before, let me get started, plan for some time to actually learn the skill. Like you're gonna have some setbacks. You will run a study. You might see like, okay, people like did not get what I wanted them to do at all, and it's not the fault of the game. It's the fault of my test setup. Like maybe I chose the wrong way of testing. Maybe I chose the wrong target audience for this. Maybe the build was completely broken. Stuff like that happens, and it's okay. I think it's important to realize that playtesting is something that you need to learn, and that takes some time. And if you look at like game design curriculums these days, actually doing some education on playtesting, like we work with a couple of universities to also give the teams access to our tools for their like semester projects and so on. But so that's one part, right? Plan for it to take a little while. What we do to help them get started is these days we can provide a lot of advice. So 8 years ago, it was just my co-founder and me getting started, and it was very tech-driven. Like the main value of PlaytestCloud was that, hey, here's a way to get a build in front of a player. And that's still, of course, a key value, but we run thousands of playtests every year. We see what works for pretty much any genre, any sort of like challenge that you're having, and we're so happy to share all of this. Like one decision that we've made early on in the company is like, we'll never send you an email from a no reply email address. Like whatever email you get from us, whether it's, well, the automated ones, right? Like, you hit reply, you usually are talking to the people in our project management team, or like sometimes even me, and we've seen a lot. We're happy to share advice on like setting up your study, on analyzing it. We've got a user researcher like in-house who you can just book a call with for free. Like if you're a client of ours, just like there's a Calendly, you can go on there, schedule an hour to like help him do whatever you need done. So that's like the general education that we do, but we've also gone in to like studios of our clients, done like trainings, talks, help them, also help themselves. Like usually we know who the top users at these studios are, but oftentimes other game teams don't know that. So like we're also working a lot on building these connections within the studios and surfacing that knowledge and awareness of how playtesting can be done. I think, and that's important. Like we're all learning this, and it's a new field. Playtesting hasn't been around for mobile that long.
And I think it's important that because of the video format, I think it's really important to share those with the team, because there's, especially at big studios, they don't want to do that because they kind of want to focus everything on their own work. But we're all here to make games, and we're all here gamers. So it's very interesting to see how people are playing your own game. So I'm in for kind of getting everybody to look at these videos, but at the same time, you have to give ownership of fixing. Like, for example, the way we've approached it is a lot of the times as we do different fixes, like we give the material to the team or to a small group of people who are focusing on 1, 2, 3, few of these elements, and they decide how they want to fix it based on the videos and they see it. So there's a lot of ownership given rather than somebody else interpreting for them and saying, like, this is how you need to approach it. So that's also kind of like distributes the ownership of playtesting to the team as itself, and then very interesting to see the new video that comes out where the issue has been fixed and it's not there anymore. So very very sort of tangible progress.
It's interesting to see how this has also changed over the years. So when we started out with PlaytestCloud, few companies had any user researchers on staff. It was even the big players back then, they might have had 2,000 employees, but they had 5 user researchers, if at all. Yeah. They were usually working on other things than the gaming side. But what really has changed over the years is that the user researchers in the companies are also working to empower the game teams to do more research. And this varies. Some companies have a user research team and all user research should go through them, whereas other companies take a more wide approach and they want to empower everybody to run good studies. And I talked about let's get artists, narrative designers, game designers, level designers in on this so they can find out if they're hitting whatever goal they have with the experience they're crafting. But it's of course important that they do it right. Everybody can lie with statistics. You can run a test that just confirms what you want to see. But some of these bigger studios have grown user research into an advisory function where teams can go to them and they will help them see, hey, okay, you're running a playtest for games that we're doing this with a company right now. They're doing VR games, but now they're switching over to mobile because they want to expand the market. Those teams don't really have experience doing playtesting on mobile. They've done some on VR, but that's a very different beast. They hired some user researchers who have worked on the mobile side, but not with the sole purpose of running all the studies and hogging that responsibility, but teaching the teams how to do this player-centric development using tools like PlaytestCloud to get the ground truth. And I think that's a very powerful approach because playtesting is everybody's business, I think.
Yes.
If you're working on a game, you can't say that department is responsible for the user experience. That doesn't make sense. Even developers make decisions that will directly affect how the game is perceived. So
of course,
have them watch the videos, have them run a test every now and then and empower people to do that. And I think that's also how you get to this point where people are wanting to playtest better, want to learn about it because they see how it benefits their own work, how results of whatever it is, whether you're designing that one screen or the entire meta game, they will be better if you can get input from players and if it's a skill that you possess.
I agree with that. So before I let you go, what are some of the mistakes that the developers do when they start playtesting? What is the stuff that you see? Because I think the expectations are quite high or low. I don't know.
I would say not testing is the biggest one. I mean, we talked a lot about that importance, but still we're experiencing we're having talks with studios that you wouldn't believe for playtesting, we heard about it, but we're not doing that, and it's why? And oftentimes it just baffles you, but then they get started or you sort of force them to confront what they could learn with this. And I think seeing is believing here. So if somehow you find an advocate in there, you get them to run a playtest and you see oh my God, Joe, like 40 from Seattle, fails at this, and you show that to the teams, they're like, okay, yeah, maybe we should like do this a bit more often. So I'd say like most common mistake, like not doing it or not doing it way too late. I think we talked so much about like the risk management aspect here, but we see that so often that the first encounter a studio has with playtesting is because they have a severe issue, like something is not working, like retention is problematic, or like just like they can't get a certain thing off the ground because people don't seem to get it, and they tried everything else, and this is sort of like the Hail Mary, like, okay, let's see, like, can we learn anything if we put this in front of players? And oftentimes they can, and that changes their mindset then. So I would say if I can give any advice to people here, like, skip that part, like, just start testing, and like, you don't need to fail by being blind to like the player experience. Like, there are tools out there that make it super easy. I think if we want to talk a bit more specific, I would also say we see this especially from like newer studios, not testing with enough people. So you mentioned this earlier, like you need to watch the videos on PlaytestCloud, and I would say that's probably one of the biggest time investments that you as a team and like as like a leader of a studio will make into playtesting. Like, you sit down, you watch these videos to learn something from them. And what we've seen is that some studios are very cautious, and they think they're guarding their time by, let's only do a test with like 2 or 3 people. You know, it's only like an hour of video material then versus like getting 4 or 5 hours of video material. But I think that's like, it doesn't work out like that, because you get these 2 videos and you're trying to get like every possible like bit of information out of that. And you also have like, if you only have 2 people, you have 2 conflicting opinions.
Of course.
If I run a test with 10 people, I think about some survey questions, which we can also help with. Like, I can get these videos, I'll look at the survey, I'll read through the answers, and I'm like, okay, people are having problems with like this and this. They didn't understand what that character is doing, and like nobody wants to keep playing. Okay. Now I know what to look at in the videos, and I can go through these videos and like spot on, like go to, okay, I know like they mentioned this mechanic, I know when that gets introduced. I'll see to that moment in the video, I'll watch a few minutes here, a few minutes there, and it allows you to get a lot more from the video. So I would say, like, think about playtesting a bit differently, where it's not like I need to absorb every second of like the player's experience, but have a goal in mind, go for a few more players, and then use tools like the survey to narrow down what you really want to find out. The result is you'll have much more reliable data when you go to your team. Like, it's not like, okay, Mary didn't understand that, but it's like, yeah, we had these 5 people who were all in our like key audience that we want to reach, not get this thing. Like, folks, it's serious. We need to like rework this, like I've been preaching for 2 weeks or something. So yeah, I would say, you know, start testing early, iterate, like test again, like uncover more and more things as you keep going, because those are the things that we often see are lacking, and they lead to, you know, games that fail, games that don't live up to the potential that they have.
I would also add that don't make the playtests exclusive, in the sense that it's not only for a few people. Just allow others to watch them. I think it's really important for the team to know what's going on, because otherwise they only live by the gut feeling, and they don't know, you know, the reality. So really important to distribute that information. Last thing, how is the platform evolving in the future? Because you've talked about all the tools that you have for now. I know that you guys are working with Solston, used to be known as 12 Traits. So they are offering packages with basically using your million players as a test group to really understand deeply the audience. But what other kind of stuff is coming out?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. So we're working on a couple of things right now. I already mentioned it earlier. testing in more countries. It's probably the number one thing we've been asked for. And right now, PlaytestCloud mainly has players in the US, UK, and Canada, because those markets are, of course, super in demand for testing. But there's no technical reason behind that. PlaytestCloud works internationally, and actually later this week we're taking the first step there, introducing our global player panel, launching in over 10 more countries, a couple of regions. And if you want to test in Southeast Asia, Europe, Nordics, those will be some of the launch regions we're also adding. We'll have that. We'll roll out more and more countries there as time goes by. In the beginning, it's focused on English speakers in those countries, but we'll also open that up to German studios being able to test with German players, Finnish studios with Finnish players, if that's what you want to do.
All the 100,000 Finnish players.
Exactly.
I think you can hold off on that market for a while. I would maybe focus on Arabian markets, those kind of things.
Yeah, exactly. South America is interesting for quite some genres too, and that's also going to be one of the launch regions.
So basically, just more tools to allow culturalization of your games.
Yeah. And some games are also just developed for those markets. I mean, we're in a global economy, and we want to support those studios. Another part that we're working on is also making PlaytestCloud more accessible to super small studios. So we don't have this formally announced yet, but we're going to introduce some offers that are aimed at indie studios, because so often, even with the tools we have these days, game development, when you're in the seed stage, if you're only starting out, you don't have a lot of money, but you still want to make a good game. And we want to level the playing field there more. We want to put out some really attractive options for them, both from the education point of view, how do you play test, but also, from the financial side, make it really easy for folks to get started, get the foot in the door, and learn how to build games on that. Because at the end of the day, they will be more successful with that, and they can make better games. We've seen this time and time again. And it's also our story. We never took funding. We wanted to build something valuable that, delivered value. And we also want to support studios who want to do that, who want to build a game that can crack the charts, even with small means. So, that's another thing we're working on. And then there's a lot of other things in the works. We want to do, we want to support people watching the videos with AI and automation to spot some of the cool things that are happening in the videos. There's work going on that, but we have a high threshold for when we want to launch these things, because we want to make sure these features are useful and they're pointing out important moments in the video and not just noise. And it's all about making analysis easier, making playtesting easier, and unlocking these insights in a way that you don't need to be a user researcher for, which you don't need to be. It's all about if you care about games, we want to make it even easier for you to get these tests done.
Well, amazing stuff, Christian. Your service has been of tremendous help for hundreds of studios and continues to be, and I'll continue to be proponent and advocate for your tool for the next 8 years to come, and even more. So thank you for PlaytestCloud. I'll be honest, it's a great tool, really invaluable for studios around the world.
Thank you. It's been fun working with so many wonderful studios and people like yourself. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for listening. Christian, how can they get in contact with PlaytestCloud? PlaytestCloud.com?
Yeah, playtestcloud.com. Hello at playtestcloud.com if you want to send an email. But go to our site. You'll find many ways to get in touch with us. We've also got a fun YouTube channel where we talk about playtesting, have some introduction videos, webinars, and everything. But playtestcloud.com, and everything else will follow.
Beautiful. Check it out, and we're out.